Mom and Dad are an embarrassment to me. That was the sentence I heard on my own son's wedding day. Not from a stranger, but from the boy I once taught to hold a hammer when he was barely 6. I stood in that brightly lit reception hall, holding a gift paid for by 30 years of labor, and I was quietly pushed toward the back door, like a mistake that needed to be hidden. I thought that humiliation was the lowest point of my life. I was wrong, because 15 months later, when he turned on the television, that was when he finally learned what it truly means to lose everything. Before I tell you what happened behind that door, if you're listening to this story right now, please subscribe to the channel and leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from. Every subscription, every share you make, helps stories like this avoid being buried in silence. And now, let me tell you how it all began on that very night. I still remember that moment clearly, right after those words were spoken. No one else in the reception hall heard it. Or maybe they pretended not to. The music kept playing. Crystal glasses kept clinking. Expensive suits kept moving around, as if nothing had happened. Only my wife and I stood still, like someone had just shut a door right in front of us. My son stood in the aisle blocking the way. His voice dropped lower, but it didn't shake. He spoke fast and clean, like he was handling an inconvenience. He said, "We should leave through the back. Fewer people pass through there. It'll be less awkward for both sides." I looked into his eyes, trying to find something familiar. I found nothing except impatience. Mary tightened her grip on my hand. I could feel it growing cold. She was wearing her old light blue dress. She had pressed it carefully since early morning. I remembered her standing in front of the mirror for a long time, asking me if it looked too plain. I told her no. I told her she had always been the most beautiful woman. In our wooden house in Pennsylvania, I never thought to compare her to the women in that room. I never thought I needed to. In my hands was a wooden box. I had made it over 3 months. In the evenings after work, old oak wood. The scent was still there. Inside was a savings book, worth $50,000. Not a large gift for the people standing in that hall, but an entire lifetime to me. I had planned to tell my son that this money was for him to start a new life, not to prove anything to anyone. I didn't get the chance. He glanced at the box, then turned his face away. He said the bride's guests were very sensitive. They weren't used to inappropriate images. I didn't ask what images. I understood. My leather shoes were worn. My hands still had cuts that hadn't healed. I didn't belong in that room. I was just the man who drove him to school every morning, the man who patched his torn backpack, the man who waited outside the schoolyard while he took his very first exam. None of that showed up at the wedding. We walked out through the back door. No one saw us off. No lights, just a long hallway, and the cold smell of metal. When the door closed behind us, the music was cut off, as if we had never existed at that celebration. Mary lowered her head. I heard her breathing faster, trying to keep herself from sobbing. I said nothing. I was afraid that if I spoke, my voice would no longer sound like my own. Outside, snow fell lightly. This city wasn't meant for people like us. Taxis passed by, but none stopped. We stood under the awning for a long time. I took off my coat and placed it over Mary, even though I knew I'd be colder. She looked at me. Her eyes were red. Still, she nodded and thanked me, like she always did. We had been married 40 years. We were used to not asking more questions. On the way back to the cheap hotel a few blocks away, Mary asked me just one thing. She asked if we had done something wrong. I didn't answer right away. I thought about the long days in the wood shop, the late dinners because I came home late, the way we saved every dollar so our son could study somewhere better. I thought for a long time. Then I said no. I said we had done nothing wrong at all. But I don't know if she believed me. That night, I placed the wooden box on the table. I didn't open it. I just looked at the grain of the wood, the small knife marks I had intentionally left behind. They were traces of my hands. I thought about mailing the gift back. I thought about keeping it. In the end, I did nothing. I closed the lid and put it into the suitcase. The next morning, we left New York. No phone calls. No messages. I didn't expect any. but the silence still felt heavier than I thought it would. On the bus ride back to Pennsylvania, Mary fell asleep against my shoulder. I looked out the window, watching rows of bare trees slide past. I thought about our wooden house, the small piece of land behind it, where I once taught my son how to build his first chair. I didn't know when I had become something that needed to be hidden at that time. I still believed the humiliation at the wedding was the worst pain a father could endure. I didn't know it was only the beginning. I didn't know there were things closed off more tightly than that back door of the reception hall. And I certainly didn't know that my son's silence after the wedding, the silence that followed, would be the thing that changed everything. After that wedding, our wooden house grew quieter than it had ever been. Not the gentle quiet of rural Pennsylvania, but a silence with an empty space inside it. In the mornings, I still woke up early. I made coffee. I opened the wood shop behind the house. Mary still prepared breakfast the same way she always had. On the surface, nothing had changed, except for one thing that was gone: the ringing of the phone. At first I told myself my son just needed time. A wedding, a new job, a new life in New York. I repeated that to myself. Every time Mary paused near the phone, then turned away. A week passed, then a month, then fall came and went, dry leaves piling up at the entrance of the shop. No check-in, no explanation. The silence wasn't loud, but it wore things down slowly, like rain soaking into wood. I placed the wooden box on the highest shelf. I didn't want to see it, but I couldn't throw it away. Whenever I reached up there for something else, my hand would brush against the cold surface, and I'd remember the bright reception hall, the back door closing. Mary never brought it up. She just worked more in the garden, as if the soil could help her forget something. I knew she remembered. I just didn't know how. 15 months passed like that. We lived quietly, carefully. I took on a few small repair jobs nearby. I stopped driving far. I didn't need more money. I just needed the days to pass without trouble. Then one evening, Mary was washing dishes, and I was watching the local news when my phone vibrated. It wasn't a call, just a notification from a social media app I rarely used. The name Chloe appeared. I almost ignored it, but the small image beside the text made me stop. I opened it. A party, bright lights, fresh flowers, and on the table, between wine glasses and decorations, was my wooden box. They weren't using it to hold memories. They were using it as an empty decoration, stuffed with discarded things, just to match the table. I stared at the screen for a long time. I didn't feel anger right away. The first thing I felt was emptiness, as if the last thing connecting me to my son had just been shut, without a word. Mary stood behind me. She didn't say anything. I turned off the screen. We didn't talk about it, but that night I couldn't sleep. I sat in the workshop, a small light on looking at the stacked boards along the wall. I thought about what I could do, not to prove anything to my son, just to answer something for myself. The next morning, I drove north of town to the old forest. It had been neglected for years. People talked about big projects, turning it into housing. I don't understand big plans. I just knew that forest once held water after heavy rain, once protected the low land below. I used the money from the savings book, all of it. I didn't tell Mary until the paperwork was done. When I did, she only nodded. She said she trusted me. I began working there every day, not as an owner, but like a caretaker. I repaired old trails, put up small wooden signs, built a simple shelter where kids from the area could come, learn about the forest. I worked slowly. I worked solid. I didn't post anything online. I didn't tell anyone, except the people who lived nearby. During that time, I didn't know that in New York, my son was falling into another spiral. The calls I never received, the messages never sent, all of it hid a truth. Logan was in trouble, and he chose the easiest way out. He went looking through old papers at home, old authorization forms, the ones I had signed years ago when he was still a child who needed me to step in for him. I found out by accident. A letter arrived from the local bank, asking about the mortgage status of the property. I read it again and again. My son's name was there, under a signature that looked like mine, but wasn't. I didn't call him right away. I didn't want to believe it. I spent several days checking everything, one document at a time. Each page peeled back another layer of truth. When I was sure, I didn't yell. I didn't break anything. I just sat down. For a long time, I thought about the wedding day, the wooden box, the way he had looked at me, like a burden that needed to be hidden. That was when I understood. The 15 months of silence weren't distance. They were a decision. That evening, I told Mary. She didn't cry. She just sat still, her hands resting on the table. After a while, she asked what I was going to do. I said I didn't know yet, but I knew one thing. I wouldn't stay silent anymore, not for revenge, but to protect what we had built, with our entire lives. And when I returned to the forest the next morning, watching the water flow steadily beneath the trees, I had no idea that just a few months later this place would become something the whole country would have to see. I only knew I was standing on the line between letting go and moving forward. And this time, I chose to move forward. I never thought that forest would end up on the national news. To me, it was just the place I went every morning to check the wooden signs, clear leaves off the trails, and sit quietly, listening to the wind move through the trees. I was used to doing things no one noticed. I was also used to not being named. Then the rainy season came early. The rain was long, heavy, and steady. Not loud, but relentless. I noticed the water level in the small creek rising each day. I called a few people from the area, asked them to check the old drainage paths. We worked in silence. No cameras, no promises, just muddy hands. On the night of the heaviest rain, I didn't sleep. I drove up to the forest near dawn. The water had risen, but it hadn't overflowed. The trees held the soil. They held the water, just as they had for decades. I stood there for a long time in the rain, thinking about things people call outdated or worn out, yet still doing exactly what they were meant to do. The next morning, the news spread faster than I expected. The lower areas were badly flooded. Other places couldn't hold. But the land behind the forest didn't flood. The water slowed. Then it pulled back. There was no spectacle, just a clear difference. When people compared the maps before and after the storm, 2 days later, someone from the city came. They asked about the forest. They asked who had stepped in to protect it. I answered briefly. I wasn't used to talking about myself. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. A week later, I got a call from a television program. They said they wanted to tell a story about the American spirit. I didn't understand why they chose me. I told them I was just a carpenter. There was a short pause on the other end. Then they said, "That was exactly why." I looked at Mary. She didn't speak, but her eyes told me I should go. On the day of filming, I wore my old jacket. I didn't bring the wooden box. I only brought my hands. When the cameras turned on, they asked me why I did it. I hadn't prepared an answer. I just told the truth. I said I didn't want to see the land closed off to the people who had lived with it their whole lives. I said some things: if you don't protect them when you can, you don't get a second chance. The program aired on a weekday evening. I didn't watch it. Mary did. She called me into the living room when the host said my name. I stood behind the chair. I didn't sit down. On the screen, I looked older than I felt, but my voice was the same, slow, steady, nothing to show off. When they announced a $5 million grant from the Environmental Foundation, I heard Mary take a deep breath. I turned to her. She held my hand very tightly. Not because of the money, but because for the first time since the wedding I saw something in her eyes that looked like relief. At the same time in New York, my son was sitting in front of a television. I learned that later. I know he saw me on the screen. He heard my name, spoken with words he had never used for me. I don't know what he thought. I only know that in that moment, the two worlds he tried so hard to keep separate, he touched. The contrast came quickly. While I received thank you letters from people I had never met, Logan received another call. Not congratulations. A notice. His company needed someone to take responsibility. Financial misconduct came to light. Not because of me, but because of the people who had stood beside him all along. His wife's family chose silence. And in that silence, Logan was pushed forward. I didn't feel happy when I heard the news. I didn't feel satisfaction. I just felt tired. Mary asked if I should call our son. I said not yet, not because I was angry, But because I knew some calls, if they come at the wrong time, only shut doors tighter. In the days that followed, more people came to the forest. Children, teachers, people who wanted to help. I used the money to expand the small center. I hired locals. I paid them fairly. I did everything the way I always worked with wood. Measure carefully, cut slowly, join it solid. I wasn't in a hurry. One afternoon, while I was fixing a small wooden bridge, my phone vibrated. Logan's name appeared. I stared at the screen for a long moment. I didn't answer right away. I let it ring. Then I turned it off. I knew that call would come. And I also knew, this time, it wasn't to send me out the back door. That evening, Mary asked if I was afraid. I asked her what she meant. She said, afraid to face him. I thought for a moment, then I said yes, but I was more afraid of continuing to pretend that nothing had ever happened. I've lived long enough to know that some climaxes don't arrive with shouting. They come in the quiet before the confrontation. When I turned off the light in the woodshop and locked the door, I knew the next chapter had begun. Not on television, not in the forest, but right there, in the place where I once taught my son how to hold a piece of wood straight. And this time, I would not turn away. They came on a cloudy morning when my workshop still smelled of fresh-cut wood. I was planing a tabletop when I heard a car stop at the gate. I didn't need to look up. Some sounds. You hear them enough times, you never forget. Logan stepped out first. He looked thinner, his shoulders slumped. That quick, upright walk was gone. Chloe followed behind him. Large sunglasses covered half her face. She paused for a moment, looking around, like she had stepped into a place that didn't belong to her. I didn't rush. I wiped my hands on a rag, set my tools down, then turned around. No one said hello right away. The silence stretched long enough for me to hear the wind slip through the door cracks. Finally, Logan spoke. His voice was lower than I remembered. He said he had been thinking a lot. He talked about pressure, about mistakes, about how things had gone too far. Chloe stood beside him, nodding at the right moments, like it had been rehearsed. They apologized. No drama, no kneeling, just carefully arranged sentences. I listened. I didn't interrupt. I looked into my son's eyes. I wasn't searching for regret. I was searching for truth. And what I saw was fear. Logan said he needed help. He said there was an agreement that needed my signature, just temporary. Just to wrap things up, Chloe pulled a stack of papers from her bag and placed it on the wooden table I was still working on. White paper against rough wood. Two worlds that had never really touched. I didn't pick it up. Instead, I led Logan to the back of the workshop. There was natural light there. The smell of wood. Things I understood. I held up my hands. Old scars layered over each other. I told him everything in this shop had been made with these hands. I said, scars like these can heal. But some things can't. Logan lowered his head. Chloe stayed by the doorway. She didn't come any closer. I turned back and looked straight at my son. I told him I knew about the old documents. I told him I had seen the signature that wasn't mine. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse him. I just told the truth. One sentence at a time, slowly. The air changed immediately. Logan looked up, eyes wide. Chloe took a step forward, then stopped. I told them I had enough proof. I said I didn't want to use it, but I also wouldn't let things stay hidden anymore. I gave them two choices. Logan could come forward himself, tell the truth, take responsibility, or I would take those documents to the place they belonged. No one answered right away. Chloe spoke first. She talked about her family, about reputation, about what would be destroyed if this came out. I listened, then shook my head. I said some things had been broken for a long time. People just pretended not to see it. Logan started to shake. Not from the cold. He asked me if I still saw him as my son. That question stopped me. I thought about the years behind us, about the boy who once sat on a wooden bench in this shop, his feet not even touching the floor. I told him I had never stopped seeing him as my son. But being a son doesn't mean being protected from consequences. In the end, Logan nodded. Just once, very lightly. Chloe turned her face away. She didn't say another word. They left shortly after that. No hugs, no promises. Just a silence heavier than the one they arrived with. The days that followed moved slowly. Logan did what he said he would do. I didn't watch every step. I only received updates when necessary. Mary asked me if I was okay. I told her I was. Not because everything was finished, but because at last I wasn't carrying silence for someone else. One afternoon, I went back to the forest. I walked the trail, looked at the newly replaced wooden signs. Children were learning at the small center. Their laughter carried through the trees. Not loud, but real. I stood at a distance. I didn't join in. I thought about Logan. I thought about Chloe. I thought about how some lessons can't be taught with words. When I got home, Mary was sitting at the table reviewing drawings for the woodworking school we planned to build. She looked up and smiled softly. Not a smile of victory, just the smile of someone who had waited a long time for the right thing to happen. That evening, I locked the workshop early. I knew the story wasn't over, but the greatest climax had passed. Not on television, not in front of a crowd, but inside an old workshop where a father finally said what needed to be said, and a son had nowhere left to hide. After that morning, our lives didn't return to what they were. They moved in a different direction. Slower, clearer. Logan followed through on the path he chose. No quiet deals were signed. No back doors were opened for him anymore. The consequences came without noise, but they came for sure. I didn't step in to protect him. I didn't stand aside feeling victory or defeat either. I just kept the necessary distance, so things could unfold the way they needed to. Mary asked if it weighed on my heart. I said yes, but it was the weight of truth, not regret. Some things, if you don't let them fall to the ground, they just hang there, draining you. I learned that from years of working with wood. If a board is warped, you lay it down and let time straighten it. Logan began doing community labor in the forest. No one arranged an easier spot for him. He cleared trails, fixed fences, did work he had never imagined himself doing. I didn't see him often. When I did, we didn't talk much. Just brief nods. I noticed the strain in his shoulders. The kind of exhaustion that comes from real labor, not from conference rooms. I don't know if it changed him, but I know he was learning how to stand on solid ground. Chloe left sooner than I expected. No big arguments. No dramatic holding on. When things lose their usefulness, some people simply step out of the frame. I didn't dwell on her. Some people enter your life only to test what you truly value. When the answer disappoints them, they leave on their own. The grant money was distributed gradually into specific projects. Nothing grand all at once. Mary and I spent many evenings at the table reviewing drawings together. The woodworking school was built from wood, sourced right here in the region. I wanted the children who came there to know that what they held in their hands had an origin, a history. Not for nostalgia, but for respect. On opening day, there was no ribbon cutting, just a few local families, a few old friends. I stood off to the side watching Mary talk with the children. She smiled more than before, not the kind of smile that hides things, but the kind that returns after a long stretch of silence. Logan arrived late. He stayed at a distance at first. I saw him looking around, as if weighing something. I didn't call him over. I didn't wave. After a while, he walked up on his own. He stood beside me without speaking. I handed him a small piece of wood and told him to hold it straight. I didn't need to look to know he was doing it carefully. When the kids began their lesson, I walked along the tables, adjusting how they held their tools. One boy asked me why I chose this trade. I told him wood doesn't lie. If you rush it, it shows right away. If you're patient, it stands strong for a long time. The boy nodded, as if he understood in his own way. That afternoon, as everyone left, Logan stayed to help clean up. He asked if he could come back the following week. I said the school was open to everyone. That answer was clear enough. He nodded, eyes lowered, but he didn't walk away right away. That evening, Mary and I sat on the porch. The air was calm, no rain. I thought about the wedding in New York, the back door, the wooden box that had once been placed where it didn't belong. I didn't feel heavy anymore, not because everything had been fixed, but because I was no longer holding on to things that didn't want to stay. Logan stood in the yard for a moment, then stepped onto the porch. He said thank you. No explanations, no excuses, just two simple words. I nodded. I didn't need more. Some apologies only matter when they're followed by steady action, not a single moment. After he left, Mary rested her head on my shoulder. She said she felt lighter. So did I. We didn't talk about the distant future. We just sat there listening to the insects in the night, like we did in the early years after we first moved here. If someone asked me what the lesson of this story is, I wouldn't talk about money or status. I'd talk about roots, about what you stand on when the lights go out. I was pushed out of a wedding for being called an embarrassment. But in the end, I learned this. Not everyone who walks in silence is a loser. Some people build their entire lives with rough hands, never stepping onto a big stage. But when everything collapses, they're the ones still standing, steady enough to hold on to what truly matters. And if there's anything I can leave my son, it isn't money. It's the understanding that real value doesn't come from where you brag about belonging, but from the place you're willing to return to when there's nothing left to hide. My story likely ends here. Thank you for taking the time to listen. If this story made you think about family, about roots, or about things once left behind, please tap like to support. Subscribe so you don't miss future stories, and share it if you believe someone else needs to hear this. Your support helps honest stories like this continue to be told. Thank you for staying.